Kuungana katika tukio hili la leo ambapo tunazindua kitabu ambacho kimeandikwa kwa lugha ya Kiingereza, lakini Kiswahili chake tunaweza kusema kwamba kutazama mbele na shule zetu ziwe ni mahali pa kujifunza. Labda hiyo ndio tafsiri ambayo sio rasmi, lakini ndio mbalimbali zile stadi za muhimu ambazo zinakusudiwa kuongeza nafasi katika vyuo vikuu vya umma, lakini pia kuviboresha. Kwa hiyo kwa Kiingereza tutasema wanafunzi wakajifunza kwa ufanisi zaidi. Na kupitia kitabu hiki ninaamini kwamba Watanzania tutajifunza kwamba tufanye nini zaidi, kwa sababu tayari kuna mambo mengi ambayo Tanzania inayafanya kuhakikisha kwamba wanafunzi wetu wanajifunza kwa ufanisi. Na haya mambo ni pamoja na kupitia mitaala yetu kuhakikisha kwamba mitaala inaendana na hali halisi ya sasa. Lakini pia tumeimarisha stadi za kujifunza kusoma, kuandika na kuhesabu, kwa sababu hizo ndio stadi za msingi ambazo zinamwezesha mwanafunzi kuweza kujifunza mambo ya mbele. Lakini pia tumeweka kipaumbele katika mafunzo ya walimu kazini, lakini pia tunaimarisha mafunzo katika ngazi yote, mafunzo ya walimu na mafunzo ya wataalamu katika fani zote, ili wanapotoka wahakikishe kwamba wameiva na wanaweza kulitumikia taifa vizuri katika nyanja ambazo wanajifunza. Na ndio maana mmeona kwamba vyombo vyetu, Tume ya Vyuo Vikuu Tanzania pamoja na NACTE wamekuwa wakifanya ukaguzi, kuangalia programu ambazo hazikidhi vigezo na kuchukua hatua stahiki kuhakikisha kwamba tunakwenda vizuri. Lakini kama serikali tumeboresha sana mfumo wa kupeleka fedha, utaratibu wa elimu bila malipo. Fedha zinakwenda shuleni kila mwezi kwa wakati, hakuna ucheleweshaji tangu utaratibu umeanza kutekelezwa Januari 2016. Lakini pia kupitia mpango wa elimu bila malipo, kwa kiasi kikubwa nchi yetu imeweza kuongeza kile kiwango cha wanafunzi kuhudhuria na kuendelea kukaa shuleni. Bado kuna changamoto za miundombinu, lakini serikali inafanya kazi kubwa sana kukabiliana na msongamano na ongezeko kubwa la wanafunzi, hasa baada ya kuweka elimu bila malipo. Kwa hiyo ndugu zangu, kwa kifupi hayo ndio mambo ambayo nimeyasema. Nashukuru sana.
Thank you very much, Guest of Honor, Honorable Minister Ndalichako. We now come to the session of presentation, and may I now welcome Dr. Jaime Saavedra for your presentation.
Habari ya asubuhi. Jambo Tanzania. Asante kunikaribisha Tanzania. That's all my Kiswahili. So, Honorable Professor Joyce Ndalichako, Minister of Education, Science and Technology, Professor William Anagisie, Vice Chancellor of the University of Dar es Salaam, and thank you very much for hosting us. Ms. Bella Bird, my colleague here at the World Bank, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for welcoming me here in Dar es Salaam. I will try to briefly give you an overview of the global challenges that we have in education in the world, which is something very difficult to do in 25 minutes. Then my colleague Sajida Bashir will do a deep dive on the challenges that we have in sub-Saharan Africa. So I will just give you a sense of what is that we see as the main challenges that we globally face, and some of the lines of action, right, that we will need to follow in order to overcome these challenges. But you know, the last year, the World Bank published the World Development Report, which is the flagship report of the bank, which that year focused on education. And many people asked why. Why is it the bank focusing on education? And if this helps me, I don't know. So it's, I'm sorry that this is not working that well. Okay, so just very quickly, I mean, education is really the driving force of many of the challenges that we have in development. Education is critical for families in order to be able to make a living and reduce poverty. It's critical for employability and wages and be able to increase welfare. It's critical for productivity and economic growth and competitiveness of the country. It's critical for improving health and resilience of families. It's critical for civic participation and for social cohesion. And so it's difficult to not underscore the importance of education, both as a critical factor for families and as a critical factor for countries. And it's not an issue that is a challenge for the Minister of Education, but it's an issue for the whole country. Right? When we look at the executive, it's not a problem, it's not a challenge for the Minister of Education, but the Minister of Finance or the Minister of Development of any country should be as worried as the Minister of Education in order to see what's happening with our investments in education, because that will define the competitiveness of the country. So we just care about growth and competitiveness. I'm extremely worried about education. So if I care about welfare of citizens, I'm really worried about education. So this really affects all of us. So what's happening with education in the world? And let me give you a couple of numbers, 43% and 53%. What are those two numbers? The world has made, and the same applies to many African countries and applies to Tanzania, great strides in terms of putting kids in school. So much more students are, young people are studying today than what happened 10, 20, or 30 years ago. So there has been a massive improvement in that sense in terms of schooling. But the main question is schooling equal to learning? Are all students who are sitting in an institution, are they really learning or not? So we have in many countries, not in all countries, but in many countries, we have learning assessments. We have measurement tools that allow us to see what's happening with math, reading comprehension, with science learning in the schools. So we take an average of all those countries for which we have data. And if we take a ballpark figure, we will see that only 44% of the kids in primary education, right, have the basic mathematic competencies that they should have for their age. And only 53% are reading and writing at the level that we expect for a primary educated child. So that's a problem. Basically, we would be saying that half of the students who are sitting in the classroom are not really learning. So we do have a problem with that. But within the world, we have many worlds. And if you see that graph, if I'm a Minister of Education in an Eastern European country, I do have a problem because about 20% of the students are not having the basic math proficiency levels. If I'm a Latin American country, if I'm in my country, in Peru, between 50 and 60% of students are not having the level of math that they should. And if we are in a sub-Saharan country, right, the problem is even larger. It's an overwhelming problem, actually, in Africa. So we do have a global problem. That's why we sometimes use the word crisis. We do have a learning crisis globally. But then when we look at the different regions of the world, the problem is in many cases much larger. So how does this impact then the achievements that we have seen in education? So in many countries, the number of years of schooling have improved dramatically. But one thing that we are doing is adjusting, in order to have a better understanding of what's happening with education, is adjusting those years by learning. So it's not the same to have 8 years of education, or in that case would be about 11 years of education, say, in Singapore, where each one of those 11 years really translates to learning, each one of those years of schooling, than to have years of schooling in South Africa. Because when we adjust those years of schooling in South Africa for how much learning you're getting in each one of those years, then the quality adjusted years of schooling are much lower. So what we see in that picture is that when we adjust for learning, in a way of saying we adjust for quality, right, achievements are much lower than what we think. Now, so I'm saying that we have a quality problem. We have a learning problem. But we need to also take into account that globally, it is not that the quantity challenge has been solved. We cannot say, all kids are in school. We only have a quality problem. We only have a learning problem. No, that's not the case. Unfortunately, 263 million children that are in primary or secondary school age are not in school yet. We still have many kids who drop out in secondary, either in lower secondary or in upper secondary, right? Or just do not do the transition from primary to secondary. So we cannot claim victory on the quantity side. We still have to do a lot of work in order to make sure that all students complete a full course of primary and secondary education, which is what any child or any young person will need in order to be competitive in an each time more challenging world. Now, so that's the problem. So what to do? So, and this is not helping me. So let me talk about 3 big issues, right? Let me talk about, okay. So in order to start addressing the challenges that we have regarding schooling and the challenges that we have regarding learning, I'm gonna talk about 3 big topics. There are many things that we need to do, but I'm gonna talk about 3 things. The issue of curriculum and instruction, the issue of teachers, and the issue of management. Like 3 big topics that we'll need to address. And many of the things I'm gonna say are things that the minister have already mentioned. So let me focus first on the issue of curriculum and instruction. So the point there is the following. So kids are in school, but what we need to make sure is that in all countries, right, we have a very clear understanding by all of the actors that participate in education, teachers, parents, students, of what is that we want them to achieve in each year. So that requires having a curriculum that is really that is an instrument that is really useful for teachers. In many cases, we see curriculums that are like wish lists of a very long list of items that we would want our students to learn, right? But given the time that we have, given the that we have in a year, and given the materials that a teacher has, we need to make sure that those curriculums are really realistic, that really are a clear guide to teachers in terms of what they have to achieve each year. Moreover, teachers have to have all the right support in terms of having all the tools to provide the right instruction to students. In many cases, we see countries in which teachers are provided with very clear lesson plans so that they have a clear understanding of what they have to do each week and each month in each one of the subjects. Moreover, many times we talk about information technology. True, this is a critical, as the minister said, is a critical and it is an instrument that can make learning much more effective, much more entertaining, faster, but actually that any technological tool has to be really integrated with what the curriculum says. And that technological tool has to be done in a way that teachers, right, can embrace that tool in order to use it effectively. And third, we need to know exactly what we expect, right? That's what a good curriculum would do. We need to have the right tools that will support the teacher. That could be lesson plans, that could be coaches, but we also need to know if things are happening. We need to be able to assess if learning is happening. And as I saw as you saw in the previous figures that I presented, for many countries we do have learning assessments, but we calculate that about in a third of the countries we just don't know anything. We just don't know how much learning is happening in the classroom. So it's critical for all countries not only to participate in international assessments, that's useful, that's important, but much more important are the national assessments. National assessments that I'm not talking about exams that allow you to pass from one grade to the other or from one level of education to the other. No, I'm talking about learning assessments that can be a very useful tool for schools, right, and for governments and for local authorities to know, in order to know if there is progress or not. Now, the other critical factor is teachers. There are many things that one has to do in order to improve the quality of education. But if you ask me if there's one thing that we need to do, is to make sure that we have the right teacher in front of each one of our students. Teachers are so important in life of people. I can ask anyone in this audience, even if you were in school 10 or 20 or 30 years ago, and you will remember the name of that teacher who said something that changed your life. Everyone here in this room will remember the name of that teacher. And we'll also remember the name of that teacher who was not so good and gave you a hard time for good or bad reasons. Everyone will remember that name for your entire life. That's just a very simple proof of how important are teachers in order to have in terms of having the possibility of changing people's lives. So we need to make sure in all countries that we have an extremely well-developed teacher's career. When I was Minister of Education in Peru and I was hiring my Director General for teacher's career, I told him, look, the only thing that you need to do is that you need to prepare teachers, you need to select teachers, you need to hire teachers, you need to define the pay structure of teachers, you need to define how those teachers are going to be promoted, you need to define what are the professional development opportunities for those teachers, you need to be able to select separate the good teachers from the teachers who require some support. You need to care about the welfare of teachers. And you have to do that for about 500,000 people. That's a small detail. So actually, that person in any Ministry of Education who is in charge of teachers' careers, it's basically like the huge human resource department, right, that has to be in charge, right, of preparing those professionals, selecting those professionals, and make sure that they have all the conditions in order to operate effectively. And why is it critical that all of them operate efficiently? Because they are in front of a child. In all professions, you have excellent professionals, you have okay professionals, and you have not so good professionals. But many people here are parents, right? You don't want to have a not so good professional being a teacher in front of your kids. Not even an okay professional. You want an excellent professional. So it is one of those occupations in which we cannot afford to fail, right? And we need to make sure that the teachers have all the conditions in order to operate efficiently. But this is a two-way relationship. Teachers are the main partner of any education reform process. So they need to have all the conditions in order to operate well, but at the same time, teachers have to internalize the immense responsibility that they have. But that is a critical issue. And what is the main predictor of an educational system that is successful? The main predictor is what is the social recognition of the teacher's career in that country. So in those countries in which when a young girl or a young boy tells their parents, what are you going to, when they are asked, what are you going to study? And they say, I'm going to be a teacher. The answer has to be, wow, great. Because that is such a demanding career. The filters are so difficult. And you're going to have such a large responsibility. It's great that you're choosing that career. Those are the educational systems that work. So that is the main element, in my view, in terms of what we need to do in order to improve the quality of an educational system. And another point that I wanted to make is the issue of management. This sounds like a very dry issue, but is actually a critical one. Because sometimes we do not recognize how difficult it is to manage a school. In many educational systems in the world that we see, the person who is in charge of managing a school is usually a teacher who has lots of years in the job. So it's usually a kind of a glorified classroom teacher. And that should not be the case, because the principal or headmaster is someone who has to manage and lead a very difficult institution. The school, in the school, he or she has to manage 1,000 students, their parents, say 100 teachers. And sometimes I tell my friends who are not in education, look, you cannot handle your 2 kids, right? Now you need to handle 1,000. And their families, and the expectations of the community. So that's what the principal has to do. And actually, when you look at a school and you compare different schools, what makes a difference in terms of the spirit of the school, or how much teachers are motivated, what's the attitude of students, it all depends on that headmaster or that principal. I've had the luxury of visiting many schools, before in my own country and later in different countries in the world. And it's very clear, right, when you go and visit a school, how different the school is in terms of the attitude and motivation of both teachers and students, depending on the principal, depending on the headmaster, right? And obviously, infrastructure matters, all the physical inputs matter, having computers matter. Yes, all those things matter. But what matters most is the spirit that exists in that school. And that spirit depends a lot on the principal. So a key requirement for a successful education system is that principals or headmasters are recruited in a meritocratic way and are selected among those people who have some of those characteristics, and also that they are trained and supported on issues related to management and leadership. Because remember that a principal has to be the pedagogical leader of the school. The principal has to manage the group of teachers and be able to provide them orientation, right, and support the teachers. At the same time, he has to deal with all the bureaucracy. Which is not nice, but that's a fact of life, right? All the financial issues and administrative issues of managing an institution. So all that is responsibility of principals. So that's why it's so important to select them properly and give them the appropriate support. But there's another level of management that is critical. I've just mentioned the micro level, right? The management of the institution, the issue of management at the point of service. But there's another level of management, which is the whole education system. And if I said that it's difficult to manage that institution, imagine if you are a minister of education and you have to be responsible of thousands of schools who are providing a service to students every single day across the whole country with hundreds of thousands of teachers to millions of students, right? That's the whole system that has to be managed. So that's why it's absolutely critical. What is the quality of the bureaucracies that we see in all ministries of education, right? And when we see countries, we need to make sure, and that's not usually the case, that when we look at a specific country, we see where is the best bureaucracy in this country. Sometimes people even don't like the word bureaucracy, but I've been a bureaucrat, so it's easy for me to talk about the word bureaucracy. So in the different ministries, in the central bank, you have bureaucracies. We need to make sure that in education, you have the best bureaucracies. Why? Because they have to manage, right, an extremely complex system that had to provide this very complex service. Imagine how complex it is, the service of education. Because at the end of the day, what does the education service means? It's teaching math and reading how to read and learning how to read and write. It's science, it's history, it's geography. But it's also about teaching social-emotional skills, right? It's also about teaching to be a good team player, teaching critical thinking, teaching or fostering perseverance, discipline, creativity. That's a very difficult job for teachers, for principals, but it's a very difficult service. At the end of the day, education service is to make a child happy and be able to live a productive life. It is a very difficult service. So hence, you need the right teacher, you need the right principal, and you need the right bureaucracies, right, in order to be able to manage such a difficult service. Let me mention just three specific issues of the challenges that we have globally on education. Are very three different topics that I don't want to leave outside. One is the challenge that we have on early childhood education. Worldwide, if we look at 3 to 6 years old, right, and depending on the country, it will be what the country requires in terms of early childhood education could be at year 3, at year 4, at year 5. But if we look at those children, about half of them are accessing formal childhood education, only half. So we have a long way to go. But the key point is that when we expand early childhood education, we cannot make the mistake that we have done in basic education. What's the mistake that we have done in basic education is that there has been expansion globally, but at the expense of quality. That's why schooling is not exactly the same as learning, as we said at the beginning. Well, now that we have the challenge of expanding early childhood education, we need to make sure that we do that with quality. The other issue I wanted to mention, and very quickly, is that we do have globally a huge challenge on adult education. Because remember the numbers that I mentioned at the beginning, right? About half of the students are not learning even if they are in school. But that's today. So that's the flow problem. Those are the kids who are studying today and will be entering the labor market in the coming years. But then let's think of 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Many of those students are had exactly the same challenge. They were in school and they were not learning, but they already entered the labor force. So there are people who are 25-year-olds, 35-year-olds, 40-year-olds, who passed already through education and didn't learn enough. So we do have a huge challenge in early on adult education, and the figure that we have is that almost 1 billion working age adults are not literate. And that's a global challenge that we'll need to face. And finally, are we ready for the fourth industrial revolution? And the answer is most likely, and in many cases not. Right? And we need to continue investing in skills of our young population. We need to continue investing in basic education, of course, and to invest more in basic education. But in terms of technical education and tertiary education, the challenge that we have is that we need to make sure that those young people have the fundamentals. They need to have the fundamentals of the basic math and literacy. They need to have technical skills, and they need to have a lot of what we call these 21st century skills. Because remember, the labor market is going to be changing. The shape of the labor market is going to be changing. But what we don't know is exactly what direction is going to take. So the only certainty that we have is that there's going to be change. So we need to make sure that all students have the capacity to learn permanently. And that is what we'll need to continue working on. Let me, because of the time, let me also only mention one final issue, which is more money needed? And the answer is a yes, but it's a qualified yes. Many countries are investing more in education than in the past. True. There has been more investment in education. But we need to make sure that all those investments, right, are done with the highest possible levels of efficiency. If we put more money into education, right, and we pay teachers' salaries, and some of those teachers are not in school or are only a few hours in school, that's money wasted. If we buy computers, but at the same time we don't prepare teachers in order to be able to use effectively any technological solution, that will be money wasted. So there are many examples in which we invest more in education, but we don't invest it wisely. But we need to invest more. It is very difficult for many countries who are today spending between $100 or $200 per student, right, to say, well, it's just only an issue of investing better those $100 or $200 per student. Yes, those should be invested in the most efficient and effective way possible. But more investment will have to come. Remember that OECD countries are spending about $7,000 per student. $7,000. Right, so we cannot say, look, we're very smart, and we can do it with 200. So that will mean that all OECD countries are a bunch of idiots, right? They're spending $7,000, what they could be spending 200 or 300. No, that's not the case. If we want to expand secondary education, if we want to expand early childhood education, if we want to improve quality, if we want to make sure that all schools have the right infrastructure, we'll need to have more resources. However, those additional resources have to be invested in a way in which that we are sure that those investments are being invested wisely. So for that is that we need to make sure that we have all the information about how money is spent. We need to have very good monitoring and information systems that will allow us to know our teachers in school, our teachers teaching correctly in schools. Are the textbooks being used? Is there, are there the right sanitary facilities in schools? Right? Is there internet in schools? So we need to have good monitoring systems that will allow us to know if things are happening and if the dollars are being spent wisely. So let me wrap up, thanking you for giving the World Bank the opportunity to accompany the Tanzanian government in continue making strides in improving quality of education. Many of the things that I've mentioned are things that the minister already mentioned. I mean, how much we need to invest in teachers, how much we need to invest in having the right curriculum, how much we need to invest in principles, is something that is part of the agenda of this government. And I am sure that working together, we're going to be able to make all the progress that is needed, because that's what Tanzanian children and young people deserve. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saavedra, for a very detailed and informative presentations. I'm already the participants, I'm sure they'll be noting what they are going to raise during the discussion. Now it's time to face forward. So without much ado, I would like to invite Dr. Sajita Bashir to make the presentation, please.
Honorable Minister, Professor Joyce Ndalichako, Vice Chancellor Professor William Anangisie, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, habari ya asabuhi. So, can I turn on the press? So, Kuangalia Mbele. That's facing forward, I think. And that is the statement from President Kwame Nkrumah several decades ago when he was asked whether does Ghana face east or west. He says, we face neither east nor west, we face forward. And we took this title to capture two things. One is that we do need to face forward. We have done a lot and we need to improve learning. As Dr. Saavedra said, we need to move forward with the learning agenda. But we also took it because we wanted to say that we shouldn't be learning just from east or west or north or south. We need to be learning from each other in Africa, because there are some good examples here. We need to learn, above all, from our own experiences in each country. So that's why our book is called Facing Forward. And the little booklet you have is actually just the overview. There is a thicker book that is coming along in a few months' time, so I hope everybody will be able to read that book. So the scope of the study is, as the minister said, Tanzania is committed to the Sustainable Development Goals, which means basic education. Grades 1 to 9 is what is usually considered as basic education. In the case of Tanzania, this may be a little longer. Some countries have 10 years of schooling. We focus on what works, that's the science, but we also look at how to implement, because the problem is not only the knowledge of what works, whether we have knowledge of what works. The biggest challenge is how do we implement. We also focus on how we can learn from each other, that is specifically from the African context. As I said, very often we are given the examples of the high-performing countries, Korea, Singapore, and so on, and we know that the conditions there are very different from what exists in Africa. So one of the key motivations of this book is that we must bring forward good examples from Africa. And we want to really focus on developing a culture of continuous improvements. By no means do we say in this book there is a knowledge for the next 15 years. Not at all. Actually, what we're saying is that we have to have that culture of continuous improvement, because if you look at the best performing systems, the one thing that is common to them, apart from the fact that their teachers have a high social recognition, is that they're continuously learning and adapting to implement changes in their system. And that is the kind of system, Honorable Minister and other distinguished guests, that we hope that Tanzania will also have. Our audience is the Ministers of Finance, as well as the Ministries of Education and Development Partners, as well as the broader stakeholder group. In this study, we do compare countries by education progress and learning, because this is important. It's good to know what Tanzania has done, but it would be good to know how Tanzania stands in relation to other countries. And we look at the implication for Tanzania. We focus on 4 areas: student progression, teachers, budgets, and the gaps in capacity. So the first part of the presentation, I'm going to give you some data comparing Tanzania with other countries. And it's a little technical, but I'll try and walk you through some of the key indicators so that you can see how much progress we have made and what challenges we have in the area of enrollment, schooling, and in the area of learning. So if we look at about 42 countries for which we could get data, we come to one conclusion. In Africa, there are 4 groups of countries. So we no longer wish to deal with Africa as one big mass. In sub-Saharan Africa, we would say there are 4 groups of countries. The first group we're calling established. That is where the gross enrollment ratio for primary education, that is grades 1 to 6, is about 100. That's where it should be. Okay, that's the red line, the horizontal red line. The second and third groups are countries where you see most of them are way above 100. And that's not a good thing, because actually you have a lot of overage children in primary education. And the last group is what we're calling the delayed group, where the gross enrollment ratio is actually, in general, well below 100. But there's another aspect to this progress, and that is that, is the question of how many children are out of school. And you see that the number of children who are out of school in what we're calling Group 1 countries is relatively low. That is, they have managed to get the children into school, and there's still a few that are out of school, but by and large, they have good coverage. You see on the right-hand side, the Group 4, that the proportion of out-of-school children is very high. That is why they're delayed. And in between are the Group 2 and Group 3, and as you see in the Group 3, you have a significant number of children who are out of school. Tanzania is in Group 2. I was actually a little surprised to see that Tanzania was in Group 2, because you have had a policy of free primary education for quite some time. But this means that you have about, quite a lot of children in school. The gross enrollment ratio is about 100% or so, a lot of overage children, but you still have a significant number that are out of school. Now, where do these countries fall? And you see quite a distinct geographical pattern. The Group 1 countries are all in southern Africa mostly, and then Kenya and Ghana, a few island nations like Mauritius, Seychelles, and so on. The Group 4 countries, the red color countries, are all under the Sahel, as you see. Mostly Francophone, but mostly that group of countries. And the group 2 and group 3, you see them scattered all over Africa. So you see a distinct pattern emerging in Africa of some countries, some groups of countries moving ahead, and the others falling even far behind. Okay. If you look at lower secondary education, and this we are calling, in order to be able to compare countries, we had to use a standard definition, and we have used lower secondary education to mean grades 7 to 9. That doesn't always correspond with your own cycles, but this is the only way we could make it comparable. You see again that the group 1 countries have, by and large, they have a high level of coverage of lower secondary education. Group 2 is a little higher, the others are much lower. Tanzania is actually very low in this, in lower secondary education. And that is one of the reasons that you now have a free secondary education policy. Again, I was very surprised by this, but then when I looked at the data, I see that Uganda announced free primary education in 2007, Kenya announced it in 2008, and many of the other countries have done it about a decade ago. But you look at Uganda, even though they announced it in 2007, their coverage is actually still very low. So it's not only the policy that matters, it's what is implemented. And Tanzania has a lot of catching up to do on the lower secondary education agenda to be close to group 1. The point here is that the access agenda is not over. We cannot say that we are done in sub-Saharan Africa with just with ensuring that everybody has access to school. That is not the case, and especially not the case in lower secondary education. So while we have to improve learning, we have to also be able to provide space for all these young people. It has increased as we show in these arrows, it has increased substantially, but it is still low. This is lower secondary education. Now, let's turn to learning. And just to kind of fix things a little bit, because I'll be talking a bit about assessments, by the end of grade 2, children should be able to read correctly about 45 to 60 words per minute. Okay. So if you were to go to a school and you were to test kids, you should be able to find whether kids have really learned anything in reading. Okay. By the end of grade 4, they should be able to read a text, a simple paragraph, and be able to answer questions on that. And we also know that there's a wide gap between children of poor backgrounds and children of rich backgrounds. In the US, for instance, we find that children of rich backgrounds, they enter school with about 20,000 words as their vocabulary. Poor children enter with about 5,000 words of vocabulary. So what the point of that is that in Tanzania, the poor children will have much lower level, much lower verbal ability than the richer kids. And therefore, schooling should actually compensate for that lack of knowledge amongst the kids. So the children who are coming from disadvantaged backgrounds are starting from a much lower kind of level. So the next slide is going to show a way in which we have tried to see whether children are meeting the minimum proficiency level on different tests. And just to explain that a little bit, the tests we have are of all different kinds, okay? And some are for grade 2, some are for grade 4, some are for grade 8, and it's hard to put them all together on one measure. It's as if for a child, some people had measured the height, some had measured the weight, some had measured the circumference of the arm, and then how do you put it all together? So what we've tried to say is that we will find out from each of those measures what is the minimum proficiency that a child should have. And our expectation is that at least 75% of the kids should reach that minimum proficiency. So the next slide shows across about 25 or 30 tests how many children reach the minimum proficiency. And you see here that the green kind of dots show that 75% of the kids reach the minimum proficiency, the dark green dots. Okay, and you see that it's mostly in the group 1 countries that children are performing better. On the other hand, you see that the red dots, that means less than 25% are reaching the minimum proficiency. Minimum proficiency can just mean, can you read a sentence on a particular test? A lot of the children, the majority of children in groups 2, 3, and 4 are not reaching even that minimum benchmark. And this is what we mean by the learning crisis. Other measures of this show, for instance, in 4th grade, when we compare whether children can read a paragraph or not, actually you see that Tanzania, this is taken from the service delivery indicators test that the bank did, Tanzanian students in Kiswahili do fairly well. They can read a text. That's because they're being taught in that language of instruction. In English, they cannot. That's not their language of instruction, but they should be improving because by grade 7, grade 8, you're going to be moving to English. And you see that in English, barely anybody can read a text. Okay. But still, Tanzania is performing better. You see some of the other countries like Uganda, Nigeria, hardly any kid can read a text. If they cannot read a paragraph by grade 4, you can be sure that they cannot progress any further because they would not be able to read the textbooks. Even if you have textbooks, they would not be able to read them. So this is the learning crisis. We show here the SACMEC results that math scores have improved over time in many of the countries. Tanzania, unfortunately, did not participate in SACMEC 4, so we don't know what is the most recent trend. But overall, there's some modest improvement in the trends in learning. But our main message is that the learning crisis in sub-Saharan Africa is very serious because by international standards, sub-Saharan African countries are very low performers. So if you look at the next slide, you will see this looks at grade 8 TIMSS scores, that is in math, an international survey of math assessment of grade 8 students. The red line across shows the international average, and the 3 countries that participated, South Africa, Ghana, and Botswana, are well below that line. There is a little bit of improvement in South Africa, but these are the countries, remember, they're all in group 1. They are performing almost 1 standard deviation below some of the top performers. So children in our countries are really well behind the international average. And we don't know what would be the situation in Kenya, Tanzania, and so on, but we can speculate that based on the performance of Botswana, South Africa, Ghana, the performance is probably pretty low. Now, the issue in our book, we look at what is happening in schools, and we see that some groups of children are doing really worse than others. Those are the poor children, the rural children, children who do not speak the language of instruction. And gender, however, that effect varies by country. Now, poor and rural children, perhaps you cannot do very much about, but language of instruction is something that one can do something about. We also see that teachers, classrooms, and school resources do make a difference. One of the key things is what we are calling structured pedagogy, something that Jaime referred to. This is the tight alignment of curriculum, teacher training, instruction, and assessment. If you get that right, and there are many good examples we have given in the book, then children learn better. The teacher content knowledge is important. Instructional time is important. In many countries, kids get just 2 hours of instruction. How much will they learn in 2 hours? So if you increase instructional time, you're going to get better learning. And infrastructure, classroom, and school pedagogical resources also matter. This is a slide which shows the difference in learning between those who speak the language of instruction and those who do not. This uses PASEC scores, and you see the wide gap between those who speak the language of instruction and those who do not. Of course, in Tanzania, you have one language of instruction, which is good. It's helpful for the kids, but it is important to note that at least in grade 1 and grade 2, children are coming in with different languages, and they need to start being able to understand Kiswahili. So we deal with 4 issues here: student progression, teacher management and support, using the budget, and closing the capacity gap. And you will notice that the minister said similar things, and so did Jaime. The difference is perhaps that we have some data on Africa, which could be useful. So one of the first things is the question of student progression. And we identify 3 issues. The early grade traffic jam. There is a big traffic jam in the early grades, and I'll explain that. There's the problem of the bottleneck to lower secondary education. And there's the problem that we have demand-side constraints to lower secondary education. So what is this traffic jam? There's one problem: the kids are just stuck in the early grades. They just come into grade 1, attend a little bit, go away, come back, perhaps go on to grade 2. That's why when you go to many African countries, you'll see about 150 kids in grade 1, or 100 kids in grade 1. And then by the time you get to grade 5, grade 6, that number has dropped to about 30 or 40. So it's just that the children are just repeating. Even if there's no formal repetition policy, there is an informal repetition policy. This leads to accentuating the problem of learning environments. You have huge class sizes, so then the children don't learn, and then they repeat again, and this becomes a vicious cycle. And above all, there's usually a problem of the language of instruction. Children encounter this big mountain of skills that they have to learn, and they can't learn. They can't learn in a class size of 100 or 120. They cannot learn if they're listening to a language that they cannot understand. And we give you this example here, which shows that there is a problem of swollen enrollments in grade 1. If a country or a district has this problem, that there's continuously more children in grade 1 than the age-specific population. That's the first graph. And you see Rwanda is consistently above 150. Peru has come down to about 100. Peru had a similar problem. If there's consistently new entrants in grade 1, which exceed the age-specific population, and it's over 125 or so, there's a problem there. And if the grade 2 to grade 1 enrollment ratio is below 0.8, there's a problem there. Because then you know that the kids are being stuck in grade 1. And we think this is one of the big issues that has to be addressed if we have to address foundational learning. And we compute an index of this, and we see that all the countries that are on the left, the red countries, you know, this is the composite index of the 3 indicators I showed you. Most of them are sub-Saharan Africa. Tanzania, it seems, does not face that problem at the national level. But I think that now that you announced free basic education, you probably saw a surge in kids coming into grade 1. This is what has happened in many countries. And most likely, you will see this problem for the next few years if we don't fix it. So this has to be addressed. The second issue, the third issue, I didn't deal with the big classroom sizes, because if you can deal with the first issue, you will deal with that question of how to reduce the class sizes. The second issue is about the language of instruction. And the problem in Africa is that there is no consistent policy. Tanzania has a consistent policy, which is a good thing, and you implement it too. But you can do better at it, because you could improve, for instance, the transition from the local language to Kiswahili and from Kiswahili to English. But many of the countries do not have a consistent policy at all. So how do we expect countries to learn? So we think this is an important issue to address. The transition to lower secondary education is extremely difficult for most kids, especially girls, rural children, and poor children. And the problem you have is then that lower secondary education becomes mainly for rich kids, boys, and in urban areas. And we do need to address the demand-side constraints. We have to plan for the increase. Lower secondary education enrollment will double in 10 years. That means we have to decide what is the kind of schooling that we will provide. Will it be boarding schools or will it be day schools? What is the minimum package that we will provide so that there is equity? Elimination of exams is extremely important. Perhaps the end of Standard 7 exam is not an appropriate thing because that restricts kids from entering into the higher grades, and I know you're considering or you have already abolished that and replaced it with an assessment. And then we have to consider other barriers for children to enter lower secondary education. On teachers, Jaime has already dealt a lot with that, so I'm not going to go into detail because we have a shortage of time. But we identify 5 areas: improving the professional knowledge and competence, strengthening the leadership of school heads and others, improving teacher deployment and teacher presence in schools, ensuring all schools have minimum learning conditions, and strengthening accountability and incentives. Just to, these are some of the policy challenges that are there, and many of the problems relating to teachers is something we have inherited from the past because of this very rapid expansion. So teachers are of low quality, they've had different kinds of training, their knowledge level is low, their knowledge of pedagogical methods is low, we're not able to provide good teacher support, and so on. So just one slide here to show the relationship. We only have an example of one African country that has participated in a test of teacher knowledge, which is on the horizontal scale, for mathematics teachers. You know, teachers who are going to become mathematics teachers, students who are going to become mathematics teachers. And on the vertical score is, vertical axis is the score of students of grade 8, their math scores. And you see how strongly correlated they are. Botswana is the only country that participated in both, and you see it's low on both, right? Both on teacher knowledge and on student performance. So we can again speculate that the majority of teachers in sub-Saharan Africa, secondary level teachers, would have probably lower scores than Botswana. And that's the problem that we're facing. How do we improve learning when teachers have such low scores, right? And this is what the book tries to address. So on minimum learning conditions, Jaime also talked about minimum learning conditions, and this is important for motivating teachers. It's sometimes as important as incentives and so on. Of course, you have to pay salaries. If you don't pay salaries, I don't think teachers will be very happy. But the other important thing is the working conditions. And the red lines show that the majority of schools in sub-Saharan Africa, barring those in Group 1, they don't meet those minimum learning conditions. And so this is very important. We emphasize the need to have a minimum learning package for every school, for the kids, but also in order to ensure that teachers are performing well. So I'm just going to run through this because we offer in the book various suggestions, and we highlight what does not work. So sometimes we think training is required, but the important thing is what kind of training. And we find that the pre-service training is not very effective. The one-off in-service training is not very effective. What we need to move to is to have the initial teacher education much more organized around practical teaching rather than theory, and there has to be recurrent support to the teachers and headmasters, from the headmaster and from others. Otherwise, you don't improve teaching in the classroom. And We also deal with the strengthening managerial and instructional leadership, about improving teacher deployment. Many times that happens is that there's a rule for deploying teachers, and afterwards everything changes because the teachers and the others get together with the district officers and they try to exercise influence. So we're very happy in Tanzania that the minister and under the EP4R, they have succeeded in trying to rationalize this deployment within districts, which we find is as problematic as the deployment across districts. Now, on the question of improving the budget to improve quality. As Jaime said, is more money required? Definitely in sub-Saharan Africa, more money is required. But we also need to say that if we get more money, where are we going to spend it? And we identify that we have to spend the resources on what would improve learning, on reducing the disparities in standards of provision, and in improving the efficiency of public spending, and we need to do projections going forward. So, education spending as percentage of GDP, countries are making a lot of effort, especially in Group 1. But also, you see in Tanzania, it's not bad. You have improved also. It's not as good as in the Group 1 countries, but it has improved. Now, countries are making a lot of effort in relation to their income levels and their national budget, but the per pupil spending is about $200 in primary education, about $400 in secondary education. Just by comparison, South Africa, which is a Group 1 country, spends about $2,000. You can say that South Africa is spending as much as other middle-income countries, but not achieving as much in learning, right? Because we saw that they were not performing as well. But $200, $400 is not enough for quality education. Definitely that needs to rise. Where will that money come from? One of the important things we identify is that aid is not going to be that important. It will be domestic revenue mobilization. And how you spend the money is very critical. The capacity to execute the budget is extremely low, and so we are saying that we notice, and you may find that in Tanzania, that the budget is about 95% on salaries. You don't budget for textbooks, school grants, and so on. SSA countries depend on donors. The rates of execution of the non-salary expenditures are very low, and there's very little predictability of funding. So all this is not an issue just for the Ministry of Education. This is an issue for the Ministry of Finance. But ministries of education do need to build their capacity to monitor the budget, to prepare the budget, to execute the budget, and to see if things are working. Okay. So we are really suggesting that about 20% of the budget should be allocated to non-salary expenditures. Okay? We are also advocating reduce the standards of, reduce the disparities between schools in terms of what each school gets. Typically in sub-Saharan Africa, if you're a poor community, you get a worse school. And that should not be the case. If you're a poor community, you should actually get a better school because you have to compensate for the disadvantage. But at least you should get the same service provision. And we need to improve the efficiency of public spending. If we're getting more money for non-salaries, we need to be able to execute that well. And an important thing is, if we already know that secondary education is going to double, then we need to do the budget projections. We need to argue our case with the ministries of finance, and we need to secure that funding. So this is a very important task if we are going to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm coming to an end. Finally, we deal with the question of the capacity gaps in the ministries of education. And we're saying that knowledge of what to do and financial resources is not enough. The challenge is really implementation. And you need to build specific capacities for that. Some of the big capacity gaps we have noticed: the inability to collect, to analyze, and use data. We show data in the report looking at what the UNESCO collects from all the countries. A lot of sub-Saharan African countries cannot supply even basic data. Technical skills. You need skills for curriculum, materials development, teacher training, planning. We don't have them. We need to have institutions that have these technical skills. One cannot depend all the time on foreign consultants or international consultants. There's the capacity to coordinate all these institutions and people, and the capacity to negotiate with politicians, with local governments, with parents, with unions, and so on. The situation we face today is very different from when we had to just open a school and put a teacher there. It's very, very different. And so what does this mean? That we don't plan enough for capacity acquisition. And we are saying that we need to plan for that. Just like we plan for curriculum development or for anything else, we need to plan where do we need to build the capacity. And we think that the key areas are having institutional and technical capacity, having information literacy for all your staff. Every single of your staff should understand what is a GER, what is an indicator, what is budget execution data, etc. All the things we're talking about here, every staff should understand that. And the coordination and leadership capacity, that needs to be built at every level. This will not happen on its own. We really think that this is something in which the donors should help and in which the countries should participate also. So this brings me to the end of my presentation, and I would just like to say that in conclusion, that it's such a great honor and privilege to be able to launch this book in Tanzania, because as the minister said, it's one of our very strong partner countries. We are very happy with the relationship we have with the government, with its willingness to listen and to share its experiences. And we really believe that facing forward, we can address all the challenges that we face today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bashir, for a very informative but also thought-provoking presentation. As per our program, now we come to the formal launch of the book. And the way the launch will be done, I will invite the Honorable Minister to come here and Dr. Saavedra. So you are the author, you'll hand over the book to him, and then you'll hand over to the minister who will then launch the book. Please come here for the benefit of the journalists. And then, after the launch, may I kind of also request you to move forward now for the group photo with just a few who will manage to do the photo. You see from the BBC and the senior staff of the World Bank who are here. Please join for the group photo. Dr. Ngombo, please join for the group photo. Okay, now we come to the next phase. Please relax a bit and just breathe a bit. It's now your turn. We will start with the panel discussion. May I know where the panelists are, please? Wherever you are, because we'll speak one at a time. But because you are 8 of you, and you have been allotted 45 minutes, of which I have requested each one of you to donate a few of the minutes. So actually, each of you will speak for 3 minutes. And yes, it was 5 minutes each. If you are supposed to donate some of those minutes, definitely you have to consider a bit. So just pick on one point which touched you during the presentation and discuss about that so that there will be more time for the rest of us to join in. So I guess that is agreed. If it's not agreed, it's understood. Then I will call upon the first panelist, Dr. Blackson Kanokisia. Please, your 3 minutes, start counting.
Thank you, moderator, and thank you, Honorable Minister of Education, Science and Technology.
You want to stand up?
Okay, thank you. For the interest of time, allow me to say protocol observed. I thank you, the World Bank and the authors. When I was reading some years ago, I came across with a report written in 1988, which the World Bank was emphasizing the need for primary education. And it clearly stated that that was the way for funding for most of the recipient countries, including our country. But when I come back in 2011, I found the building there, so I thought, okay, now things have changed with the World Bank, and I think most of the people in this room know the World Bank very well, but now it has changed members. It is our development partner, and we benefit a lot from them. Now on the report, one is the issue of a language of instruction, which has been touched upon, and home. And then I was asking myself, who are these people at home? So we are talking of the parents. Again, in the report, it is indicated that youth have low capital in them. So I was asking then, why the report didn't shed light on the efforts on investing in these youth and adults, which are very critical in the learning of these children we are referring to. Second, I will not touch much on the strength, but just on what can be improved in the future, is the way to look on the looking education as a system. We have touched basic education, but universities are the one which produce these teachers. We have colleges, which are less touched upon. So I was thinking, you have touched about the looking at, but in the report it is missing. So I was thinking of having this, let us look education as a system, not as compartments that you look at primary as a, or basic education as it is, but we can look at the entire as a system and have a comprehensive report which can inform all of us, whether policymakers, whether parents, or whether educationists, and the like. For the interest of time, the third one is the human capital, which is, of course, the focus of the report. And you have presented very well, which is, of course, deriving from the human capital theory from others, Becker and the like shows who talked about that. And what I have wanted to say is how now the human capital formation in the past have helped Tanzania to evolve to where we are now, and the successes we have. Because if you see the report is like the capital gains in the past has not helped us to some extent, except for capital gains in 1980s upward. According to, of course, you need to be selective, so because you can't address, but it is important to see the historical, historical attempts and the historical performance of this country, so that you can be better positioned to tell people that this is where this country was, and now here we are, and these are the challenges, because some of the challenges I think are more historical than what we have touched. Moderator, I think I should limit myself to the 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Shikamo, mama. Buenos dias. I wanted to make 3 points. I found the report really very good. And a lot of conceptual convergence, I think, in the work that I find myself having the pleasure of doing at Twaweza, in the research work that we do on education. But I want to make the following 3 points. I think the first one is the inequality challenge is a major one. I like the way the report looks at inter-country divergences, but it doesn't dig into what the inequality issues are, the inequality dimensions of allocations and outcomes within the countries. The first slide you mentioned, Doctor, is about the importance of education for social cohesion. And if we don't look at how allocation decisions, who gets what, and what kind of outcomes are the result, it can lead to problems. Let me give an example. We're looking at inequality in distribution of inputs and outcomes in Tanzania. You find quite a contrast between those regions which are better off and those which are worse off. For example, between 55 and 60% of 9 to 13-year-olds in Kilimanjaro and Iringa urban districts in this country actually pass our tests, our UWEZO tests, which test at the grade 2 level, compared to just 1 in 3 in a region called Geita and Kigoma, which is on the west. 1 in 3 compared to 60%. What's the difference here? Location inequality is visible in the following data. For example, I'll just pick 2. In Kilimanjaro, better off, 26 pupils share 1 toilet. In Geita, it's 74. Or 3 times as many pupils. In Kilimanjaro, 79% of schools provide lunch. In Geita, just 5% provide lunch. In Kilimanjaro, the best pupil-teacher ratio in the country, 36 pupils per teacher compared to 52 in Katavi, which is again on the west. So the challenge here is real in terms of social cohesion. These kind of intra-country divergences lead to the Boko Harams, the Al-Qaeda in the Sahel, the Lord's Resistance Army in Uganda, and even now the fractures that pose an existential threat in a place like Ethiopia. Point number 2, teacher incentives. I like that it showed up there. I was going to gripe about something in the report, but I won't. I'll gripe privately. But what I want to say, put a plug for Twaweza, that we have done now a 4-year trial on teacher incentives, cash on delivery, we call it, or Kujifunza, the thirst for learning. And we find our results, the latest ones, show positive effects on student learning, with pupils learning in 1 year what would normally have taken them 15 months to learn. So 0.3 equivalent years of learning improvement, because you motivate teacher, you give them a bonus if their students pass a minimum level of competence. The average bonus, and people, Ministry of Finance say, too expensive, and they have said, this is going to be too expensive. Well, the average bonus earned by subject teachers in our experiment was about 42% of the average net monthly wage. So it's not hugely expensive. And then we asked them, hey, do you like this scheme? And 9 out of 10 teachers in our trial schools support the idea of performance-based pay. So this resonates with, I think in the report, merit-based promotion, merit-based pay, and incentive structures that put the best teachers, or at least put teachers in the best effort to educate the children. Final point, and this is on the management thing. I think the management of schools is absolutely important. That it might have a way to link up with the management of the entire system. So let's talk about management at the point of delivery. We have done some other analysis and studies and lots of interviews with teachers and parents. In the system in Tanzania, as in many, probably exam results and pass rates are the #1 driver of what happens and what people take care about. But we're finding quite a divergence between our UWEZO results and the assessment results that come out of the primary school and the secondary school leaving education. University professors, I'm sure here in University of Dar es Salaam, complain about the quality of the students you accept in the first year. Is that correct? He's nodding. Good, you have validated. So we need to have a debate about what the exam scores really mean, don't we? A debate about what the exam scores really measure. Is it competence or is it the ability to memorize formulas and then we need to have that kind of debate. Second, teachers actually do know what to do. Teachers know what to do, especially in early grades. They want to be involved. They have proactive ideas. So sustained merit-based teacher motivation is both possible and effective at improving learning. Final point. Schools have almost no room to maneuver. We looked at one, we've created a chart. I need to share it with you, Madam Minister, that teachers here are managed by 13 different individuals and institutions. 1-3 have a finger in what the teacher is doing or not doing in the class. 1-3. The head teacher is essentially powerless. They can't fire, they can't hire, they can't discipline. So they actually have no way to really manage the school. So schools and pupils become pawns in what we're calling the great game of pass the blame. So here's my final point and a suggestion. Maybe the way the system ought to work is to provide minimum standards for schools, but please allow them maximum autonomy to decide on how to achieve those minimum standards. Thank you very much.
Now may I invite Vincent to the intervention.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, the World Bank, for such a wonderful study, a wonderful reports, with a lot of insights, really, we observe here back in Tanzania. But so in particular, thank you very much, Madam Minister and my boss, Vice Chancellor. Having said that, I assume that the protocol has been observed. Let me start by just saying something little, that I agree 100% that the quality matters a lot. The quality matters not only at the primary level, it matters so in TVETs and tertiary. Study have shown, if you ask a student of economics in this room or any economist, will tell you that what we get in economic growth is a function of two variables, the capital formation and the labor. And even within the labor, they will give you the exponent of A, the ability. So what really makes a difference is not only labor and the capital on its own, it's the ability of that particular labor, which has to do a lot with human capital. So I'm agree 100% that quality matters. And the study I've shown recently, for the past many years, we'll be using average year of schooling as a quantity to link with growth. And it shows that it is significant. Recently, the group of other economists have said that much as the quantity matters, quality matters most. When they introduce the quality variable in the quantity goes to zero. It's a quality. So the quantity variable used to proxy the quality. So I agree. But as a starting point for Tanzania, we cannot go there. South Korea is there because they first do the basics. To me, I would say the quantity is the base. If we fit there down the independence, we don't have toilets in our primary schools. If we don't have infrastructures, if most of the schools are depleted, we talk about internet, it's not there. SDA data to show that what are the problems, hygiene, and we live in the world where we talk about gender, hygiene between boys and girls. If you don't address those basic first, in most of our schools, we don't have a base to talk about the quality. That's not saying that I lower down the issue of quality. Quality matters a lot, but what I'm saying in a very simple way, quality matters if and only if we first address most of the basic needs, which is the as well, the environments of our students from school when they go home. And I'll tell you, maybe I don't know much about the rural, but I can give you an example of what is happening in Salaam. We have many of suburbs which are not really good residentials. This is purely not because of the Minister of Education, it's purely because of the municipals, these councils, town plannings. If you start from Tandika coming to Yombo, Vituka, coming to Buguruni, probably going to Gongolambot, come to Manzese Uzuri, you'll find that in the residential areas, there are also garages, there are also industries. In the night, there are bars everywhere doing music, and there's so many other, a lot of chaos. So I'm saying we should think areas, our urban. Do we have area where we have a good environments, quiet residential areas where there are no music all the day? Here in Sinza, for example, they're in the, I can't remember this place, Maida, I don't know what, all the night. And here you have kids who are supposed to go to the school. Leave alone these things of people traveling long. So there are many issues here. Within the school, within the class, but outside. And more importantly, I think we have done very well in terms of bringing awareness about domestic-based violence. It's very high. We should also bring a lot of attention to how parents can involve their kids going to school, but how parents as well can engage with the schools. Because studies have shown globally, those areas where parents are close to the kids, are close to the schools, they perform very well. So it's not more about putting resources. It's not more about thinking so high about it, which I don't think is wrong, but let's start here as the basics. Having said that one, I'm just finalizing just a few points. I cannot talk all. I'm a bit old. I remember in the past, when you fail to go to secondary school, your choice is being a teacher. So unlike what you say that the teachers, they are so happy. Actually, in the past, I don't know recently, they are the failures. And when you have a small kid, you tell him to choose between being a policeman in traffic and going to being a teacher. He won't agree, because he associates teaching and the poverty and the low life, while this other is okay. So I think we needed to change the mindset in terms of the incentives we are giving and put the teacher at the forefront. When I see my teacher right now in the primary, I respect them than the one in university, because it's through them that I'm here. So I'm saying, let's think about that. I cannot talk so many because there are so many other important points. But the last one is about the inequality of opportunity and the efforts. I was in Mtwara 3 years ago. The entire region, there are the only 60 students who have gone to Form 6. And out of that one, only 3 went to university. One school in Kilimanjaro has got 8, and nearly more than half they've passed. So to bring harmony in this country, I think we should look so much deep in how we ensure that we don't suffer in the future about inequality of opportunities. People will complain because, and that is bad for social cohesion and political stability. Maybe let me stop there for the time being. If I were given time, I can talk more.
Thank you very much. Almost everybody has been talking about teachers. Dr. Saavedra, you kicked the ball actually by spending some 18 minutes talking about teachers, the second class of issues. So now I must invite a teacher to speak for themselves, and that is Madam Halima Kamote from Barbara Johnson. Please come and speak for yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Minister, and protocol observed. I read a little about the book, the summary of it, and I think it's nice, it's well done. I came across some of the factors that I think, as a teacher, as a headmistress for about 18 years, heading a school of girls, and recently trying to disseminate some of the practices that we apply at our school to other schools. And we think, of course, a lot needs to be done, but there are certain factors that can improve the quality of education in our countries. Some of them don't need really much money. So my school is called Barbara Johansson, and also I have come with my girls. The girls that are also involved in the project that we have been doing for 3 years, and we involved some of the very normal schools, our community schools, there are 5 of them. One of them is a school for orphans. It's called Bethsaida, but other schools are all community schools. And what we did was to disseminate 5 basic factors, what we call model concepts of our school to other schools. And these were, they were positive discipline, that is discipline without corporal punishment. Another factor was remedial classes, which I have seen in the book, that is increasing the time with those who are struggling with understanding. And another factor was empowering the students through clubs to make them more assertive, more creative, improving their talents. So, you know, through the clubs, that was also another factor which we took to other schools. And another factor, which is also mentioned in the book, is about the cooperation between schools and parents, which is very important. For us, we think 3 factors are important in making education. Students, then there is a teacher, but the parent has to be involved in what is happening to the child, and in the school, has to be part and parcel of the school. And the last factor, the 5th, not the last, the 5th that we took to other school was guidance and counseling, of which we thought is very important. These youngsters face a lot of problems, and we need to have guidance and counseling services at school. And now, after 3 years of implementing, taking over these, what we call model concepts to these schools, then we had a survey last month. And result of the survey showed for all the 5 schools, these factors really did work. Because we started with the, before we took the project, we had the baseline study, and then we observed like performance and like pregnancy level, like truancy and things like that. But later on, after 3 years of implementation, we saw that the pregnancy is almost 0 in those schools. In schools where we had 5 to 7 students in a year drop out from school because of pregnancy, now it's 0. In schools where we had, let's say, 20 division 0, now we have 2 division 0s. So you see, it worked. And I feel that sometimes we don't need so much money to invest in order to improve the quality of education that we have. Just a little bit of effort. And actually also, I think the right way, like the methodology that we used, is for a school that has those model concepts, taking those concepts to a school. It's not about going to the classroom and listening to the theory and stuff and come to implement. It's about doing things that we do. So like teachers will go and, you know, communicate with the other school on how we do the remedials. Schools were doing remedials like covering the syllabus, but you say, no, you have to assess your students and then take those ones who are struggling. Those ones need to be pushed forward. They need to have more time. But then, if they have more time, that means we have to leave them behind to wait so that they have remedial classes, but they need to have lunch. So if they need to have lunch, we have to communicate with parents. Where do we get money for lunch? So all those factors were really effective. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Everybody was so attentive. May we see the young girls you came with? I'm sure they took part in that project. Can you stand up, please? Can we clap for them? Thank you very much. Now, I would like to invite Monica Mbele for 2.5 minutes to share your experience.
Thank you very much. My name is Monica Mbele, and I'm really privileged to be here and speak something on this launching of the World Bank report as a PhD candidate from School of Education from University of Dar es Salaam. The report, which has been launched today, is a very comprehensive report, and it has a lot of information for improvement in education. I really appreciate the efforts done by the World Bank for research and financing some of the education projects in my country, and also for seeing the importance of education in sub-Saharan countries. Education is fundamental for development, and the challenges in education are many, particularly in our country, Tanzania. But we cannot solve all the problems at once, but I think it is important to focus and see what type of challenges we can prioritize them and start to see how best we can solve it. The report has provided a lot of comprehensive information, and one of the areas which I'm going to speak in 1 minute is about the issue of teachers. Teachers are very important and they are central focus of learning. And some of the consequences or some of the challenges which we are experiencing now in our country maybe are the result of the practice which has been practiced in the past. That's why we are facing a lot of challenges in the education sector. For example, I think we need to look on how best we can deploy the teachers. It's about the teachers' qualification. I think we are doing better in higher learning, whereby we are looking at the teachers' qualification, and then we are saying that those who want to join the career in higher learning, they should have at least upper second, 3.5 to 3.8 in government, in public institution. But when we are dealing with the lower level, the basic level of education, which is the fundamental for preparing those students, I think we need to look on how best we can make some reform. I think it's high time with the globalization to attract those higher achievers to join the teaching profession by creating some of the motivation and the conducive environment for them. This is a hard decision, maybe, which is supposed to be done by the ministry, but we trust our minister, Madam Professor Ndalichako, who is capable and has all the capabilities of implementing the hard decision in education sector. And the last one, which I think I must speak, this report is geared towards the basic education, but as a profession in vocational education training, I think we need to do something on vocational education and training. We know that currently in Tanzania, we have this move of industrialization, but the vocational education are meaning those youth who are supposed to have the hands-on skills. The community, the parents, even the youth themselves, they found that the vocational education training is as if it's a last option for those low academic achievers, but this is not. Vocational education is very important for the world, current, even in our country. We need skills personnel, but we cannot get those skills personnel if we don't have competent teachers. But how can we get competent teachers in vocational training centers if those who are joining vocational training centers are the ones who look vocational education as the last option? Those communities find that vocational education is just for those who think, and it's my dream as a PhD candidate to see that maybe one day our country should have an education system with the two routes. One which is based on vocational education, and another one with the academic route. It's not this report will give us some hints on how best we can do the reforms, but also try to look on the strategies at the education stakeholders on how best we can advise the government on types of reforms in different sectors of education, but also to set some strategies on how already been adopted in our country, but I think we still need to do much more, and also to make hard decisions on education policy so that we can have some positive consequence in 5 or 10 years ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It appears we are about thesis because that sounded like an abstract. Now, may I invite Gaudensia Emmanuel, please, for your intervention. Keep it very brief, please.
Thank you very much, World Bank leaders, Honorable Minister Professor Joyce Ndalichako, Vice Chancellor, the Deputy Vice Chancellors, and the members of the floor. I would like to talk on one issue because we have been talking, the report is very useful for our education development, and it has outlined some challenges or factors which affect learning on the children, and it has mentioned students who are facing learning difficulties or learning disabilities. It has mentioned that these children are going to school with the lower level or very low level of emergent literacy. They know very far, small number of words. By the agenda of universalizing basic education with quality, we should not also leave anyone behind. We should go with all the will help them learn well in the.
Yes, thank you for this opportunity that I'll be given. Protocol is observed. My name is Filippo John, a PhD candidate from School of Education. And as a PhD student or candidate, when I was leading this report, I noted that there are one key issue that is early grades. That means the issues that these children begin with when they start pre-primary or grade 1 and 2. So it's just the linguistic background that these learners begin school with. And that one creates a certain challenge on coping with learning Kiswahili, especially in the rural areas. But the report doesn't touch on the language obstruction at its lower secondary education, which is also an important part of the basic education that we are implementing now as per Education and Training Policy of 2014. We know that at lower secondary, English language is used as a medium of instruction, but majority students are struggling in learning in the language that they don't understand. So if at all, we are to continue with the use of English language as language of instruction, then there will be a problem of accessing quality education at lower secondary education. And therefore, we have to think to what extent do we invest in the preparation of the English language teachers who will provide skills to students who join lower secondary education to learn in the language that they can cope and result into better learning outcomes. So this one is what is not in my view, is not well addressed in this report. And therefore, that being the case, the Minister of Education needs to look at this aspect so that to invest in the training of language teachers for specialization, to give them specialized language skills that can give better learning outcomes and enable learners at secondary education to learn better or to cope with learning in a foreign language. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, panelists, for keeping time. We have gained a little bit at 10 minutes. Now we are going to invite the presenters to respond to the issues raised by the panels, rest they forget, after which we invite the rest of us to put questions. But since I have the mic, let me abuse my position also to ask one question. Dr. Bashir, you said that children from poorer background go to school when they know about 5,000 words, and those from better off communities have up to 20,000 words. I thought even 5,000 words is a lot. I was wondering in which language, and if you can clarify a little bit about that. Otherwise, please, I will start with you. You are the first to go. Please come forward and respond to whichever questions you think you need to respond to.
Well, thank you very much. There were several points that were mentioned, but let me just touch upon a few. One of the commentators spoke about not touching the issue of universities, and that rightly so, the system should be viewed as a whole. True, I mean, both on the latest reports of the bank and this report regarding Africa is about basic education, primary and secondary education. But you're absolutely right, that the system should be viewed as a whole. And some of you might remember there's a lot of evidence about the social returns to the different levels of education, right? So research done by Jim Heckman shows that the largest social returns comes from investing in pre-primary education, actually, early childhood education. There are lower social returns for primary, even lower for secondary education, and lower social returns for tertiary education. And that's interesting to see. But obviously, that will never mean that then we should devote all our resources to early childhood education until young people who have to go to a technical institute or to university, well, sorry, we're not going to invest in you because it's the social rates of return are a bit lower. So, I mean, born again, right? Because we're going to invest in you if you were 5 years old, right? That's not true, right? That doesn't make any sense, right? We need to cater all the students, right? True. It is true that for a, say, 20-year-old, any investment that we do would have been larger, would have a larger return if we would have also invested in his early childhood or her early childhood education. Yes, that is true. But okay, by time passed, that didn't happen, right? What can we do? Still, we'll need to make sure that that 20-year-old, right, make sure that they have the fundamental abilities, that they are digital literate, and they have the ability to learn. So we still need to invest in them. So the job of the minister is very tough, right? Because she has to cater the early childhood education, and she has to cater higher education as well, right? That's why public policy is complicated. And that is why also we need more resources for education, because we need to make sure that we cater the needs of people across the whole age range. And the other issue I wanted, I mean, there are several, but we don't have too much time. I just wanted to touch upon the issue of teacher incentives that was mentioned, I think, by Aidan. And there's a lot of debate of how those teacher incentives should be given, right? If they should be given to the teacher himself or herself, or should be given to the whole school, right? So many countries, what they're doing is that, I mean, using different types of data, they're trying to see what are the schools that perform better, and say to the third of schools that perform better, then there will be a financial incentives for all the teachers and administrative personnel of those third of schools, because that will imply that there will be more cooperation, at least within the school, right? So that's an option. But then another, and I want to mention this because it is critical that, I mean, we work more on that issue. But the other then point contentious contentious debate when we talk about merit-based schemes is what is good performance, right? Because if we only look at the schools who are doing well, maybe they are doing well because the students that go to those schools are better off students, right? And they will have a different base already, and they have better nourished, or they have more stimulation at home, and that's why those schools are doing better. So what matters in terms of performance, and that's a very important discussion when we talk about those issues, is what's the value added of the school, right? Or that when one talk about what's good performance, that one will look at what's the delta, what is the improvement that that school is doing this year with respect to the previous year. But in any case, I just wanted to point out, because I mean there are many when we talk about merit-based schemes or any type of bonuses, right? There is a lot of details that have to be worked out, and that's very important, because that's a very important policy instrument that one can use. Let me leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We do intend to close at 13:15 as planned. Therefore, I would kindly request you to address just two most burning issues you were able to pick out, so that the audience also can come in.
So I'll be unfair to some of the people who asked very pertinent questions, actually. But let me begin perhaps with what the school principal mentioned, of this partnering with other schools. And she mentioned that some things were mentioned in the report and some are not. I think you meant that some are not also. This is true. But I'd like to pick on the example you gave, because I think it's a good practice, but something which we don't find in Africa. If you look at some of the East Asian countries, it is sometimes good to look east also, even though we want to face forward, we should look at some other countries. And the East Asian countries perform very well. But one of the good things, for instance, in Shanghai, but also I think in Singapore, Vietnam, and so on, is that the good schools are required to mentor other schools. And that's actually a systematic mentorship that the headmaster of that school works with other schools, maybe 4 or 5 other schools, and actually tries to raise the performance of that school. And so whatever you did in a pilot scale perhaps is something which could be rolled out, but it does require institutional capacity at the ministry level to be able to manage this. But I mention this because I think it's one thing to have a few examples like this, and another thing to actually make it a part of system development, which I think is something that Tanzania could explore, whether that is, if there are good teachers. I mean, you also mentioned, I think, the example of Kilimanjaro versus, I think, or perhaps you did, versus another school where one school seems to be performing very well and the other school is not. Well, how about the better schools trying to mentor some of the other schools? Maybe that is something that could be tried. But the problem I see many times in sub-Saharan Africa is that we try out some small pilots, but it's difficult to take it to scale. And that is what this book is really arguing about. How do we make systemic changes, not just some small things here and there? So that is one question. The second question is about inequality. I didn't touch on it perhaps in detail, but the book actually deals with that as one of the major issues to be dealt with in sub-Saharan Africa. The big problem we have is the big inequality in performance of students. And we find actually when we do regression analyses that once you include the average socioeconomic status of the students in a school, that just about explains everything about the school's academic performance. And the average socioeconomic status of a school is highly correlated with the kinds of resources that the school gets. So if you're poor and you live in a poor community, you get a pretty bad school, and your average socioeconomic status plus the poor resources you have explains the fact that you are not doing very well. And that needs to change. If, again, looking eastwards, one of the things, say, Vietnam did was they specified all the minimum standards that a school should have, which is not like fancy things, but a school with a roof and maybe a floor, teachers that are trained, textbooks for every kid's school latrine, good climate, instructional time, and something about student learning. But every school must meet that standard. We need to specify that. We need to include it in the budget. We need to implement it. I think if we even do that very systematically, we will address the inequality issue. On language of instruction, you asked me a question. Since you were a chair, I have to respond to you. The study I quoted was from the US, but there are not many studies done in Africa about what is the vocabulary of the kids that enter school. But in general, actually 4,000, 5,000 words is not a lot. You know, if you count everything like a, the, it, et cetera, you know, that's about like the number of words that are poor kids. The main point I was making was that the gap is enormous. And so a kid coming in with very low vocabulary needs a lot more literacy support. So you need a literacy-rich environment, especially if in the home they have no access to reading material. We provide this one book that the poor kids tries to struggle to read. You actually need a much richer literacy environment. You need more books, you need story books, you need graded readers, whatever, to be able to get over this difficulty. And that relates to your question of learning difficulties also. It's true we don't specifically mention learning difficulties, because although that is something we should address, the reality is if 80% of the kids are not learning anything, then the teacher has no way to distinguish who is the kid that has learning difficulties versus who is the kid that's just not learned because they didn't have the chance to learn. So we do have to deal with it, but we are dealing with a much, much bigger problem in which, you know, if we address that big problem, we will also be able to identify those with genuine learning difficulties. If we can get 80 to 90% of the kids to learn by the end of grade 2 to read a sentence accurately, you know, understanding it, do the math, etc., you will know which are the other kids that need extra support. Right now, we are barely able to distinguish it. Really last point, I like his point about historical challenges. We have a graph in the main book, not in this overview, which shows how the per capita income in sub-Saharan Africa, how it evolved. It's only in 2004, 2004, that sub-Saharan Africa per capita income recovered to the levels of 1984. It took about 30 years because there was such a big dip in the 90s, late 80s and 90s. So we recovered, you know, only after about 1996. So that's important. If you look at the enrollment figures, you see the similar dip around that time. Okay, so we are recovering after a long period of crisis. So it's unfair. It is true. It's unfair to compare with others. But it's also true that the others have gone ahead. The other regions have gone ahead. So we've got to catch up very fast. But so history is something that is important, that can explain a lot of things, but doesn't justify where we are or where we need to be. If we have to catch up by 2030, then we will need to go faster to make up for the lack of progress in the last 2-3 decades. I haven't addressed everything, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We'll now take a few questions from the audience. I will start with 3 first questions. Would want to have a go? Please go straight. We are at the university campus, so protocols are not so necessary. Okay, we'll go around. You put hand first. You go first.
Thank you. I'd like to address how to finance infrastructure, since it is very important to learning. One, I think there is need to use the municipal bonds and increase the tax base, use the public-private partnership arrangements, and making the social securities invest in education. I think those 4 options could be good in financing the infrastructure. Thank you.
Contribution.
Hello, everyone. My name is Amani. So as much as I have the chance, I would not ask a question. As a youth, I'll rather give an answer to some of the issues that we raise here. So I think reading the report very quickly, I've noticed that it's a work in progress. And I think one of the things that we can really look at is how can we incorporate all these other players to support education. Working with ISEC right now. ISEC, it's a global youth organization. We are here in Tanzania. I've studied in University of Salaam, and I was a member here. So we have issues like career development. So for us to learn in school, I think it starts with clarity. And for us to have clarity, we need support system. Let's say we did a survey in 2016, asked people if they have support when it comes to selecting a particular course they want to study in university, and we have realized most of the youth, especially in universities, they don't have an idea what to study. So that's the biggest challenge. Another issue about skills mismatch. Yes. The skills mismatch, I think it's not a rocket science, because if you already say skills mismatch, that means the market sector know what they want and the university know what they provide. So capitalize on events like, as I said, we organize something called Career Fair, bringing students and companies. So how can we build up an environment where the university or any other education institution support that to make sure that we solve this together and not
yourself and make your point. I'll come back.
Thank you. My name is Susan Tobias. My name is Susan Tobias. I'm a secondary student at White Lake High School, and I'm going to ask questions, but first I'm going to talk. As we know, language is the medium of communication. Everybody should use language in order to communicate. As we can see, different countries, for example, America, they are well developed, but they are developed because they use their national language in education sectors and other sectors. That's why they're well developed. My question is, can't we use our national language in education sectors in order to be well developed? As we can see, most of students, they fail. As Madam there said, Kiswahili, they perform well, but English, our language, they fail. But this is due to background, linguist of background is very bad in Tanzania. So can't we use our common language or our local language or our national language in education sectors in order to make sure we perform well academically and socially and economically? And if somebody needs our services, he or she can learn our language in order to have our services, instead of us to start learning somebody else's language in our own country and start wasting time of learning other countries' language.
Thank you. Should we use our national language in order to succeed? Next, I'm going to a lady as well. It's you. Yes.
Okay. I've seen, for example, two panelists emphasized the role of parents in, of course, participating in educating their kids. But the report is like, I didn't read it, but I was wondering, why didn't they include the role of parents? Because I have a daughter, and I have realized my daughter is 5 years. She's in standard 1. Although she goes to a private school, but I spent every day like more than 30 minutes to sit with her, to look what she has learned, and to try to do all the homeworks. And this is a kid going to a private school, the Dar es Salaam Independent School. What about the public school? What the parents are really doing? We don't have to look at the government. Let us look again on the other side, because I know, for example, in the European countries, the government is doing a lot, But in our countries, we are also involved in the learning process of our
Thank you. What's the role of the parents in education? Yes, up the end over there.
Thank you very much. Again, back to the language of instruction. My question is straightforward. Can World Bank finance the use of Kiswahili as a language of instruction in secondary school in Tanzania?
Can you declare interest, please?
Yes.
Who are you?
I'm a director of Confucius that deals with Chinese language.
No. You have been you have been the head of Tanzania, Tataki, which is the Kiswahili Institute of the University of Dar es
Yes,
Salaam.
of course, please, yeah.
I am going to take the last two, and you are going to be the only one to respond to all of the questions, and then, okay, the gentleman at the back over there.
Thank you so much. Protocol observed. First of all, I would like to thank World Bank. This is our second time as the Mathematical Association of Tanzania to be involved in the World Bank activities. So my name is Dr. Said Sima. I am the chairperson of Mathematical Association of Tanzania. So a lot of numbers have been mentioned here, and what you realize in the report is that is the same thing that association is doing or try to negotiate with the government, how to improve these challenges with mathematics. Maybe I also would like to mention that next week we are going to have the so-called Mathematics Day, 14th of March. So a lot of things will be discussed here, there, and also we have the guest of honor who is from the ministry, so we'll be there to raise the issues. How can we go about this one? But what I observed in the report is that the things that we are trying to do. I'll give one experience.
No, don't give an experience, please.
Sorry.
You have made your point. You have made your point. Can you please conclude and pass the mic to the person in front of you, and that will be the last.
Thank you. Okay, facing forward, actually, MIT also facing forward and moving forward. We
pass the mic to the person in front of you, and she'll have the last word. The rest of you, my apologies.
Thank you very much. Congratulations to the bank and to the Ministry of Education, Science and Technology. My name is Cecilia Balde from UNICEF. I'm the Chief of Education in UNICEF. I love the concept of the minimum quality package for every child. I'm not referring to every school, I'm talking about every child. I think that this is a very, very important point, and the question that I have for the bank, what would such a minimum quality package cost for Africa? What would it cost for Tanzania? And how can this be taken to scale in every country in the continent? Thank you.
Dr. Sajita, I give you 3 minutes to respond to only 3 questions.
It's a tough moderator, but thank you. Okay, I think on the role of parents, I mean, that is understood, that parents have to play a big role in the education of children. It's related to the inequality issue. If parents are illiterate, which are by and large, they are illiterate, or they're very low levels of education, if they're very poor and working all the time, there is very little that they can actually do in terms of spending quality time with their kids. That doesn't mean that they cannot do anything at all. But what could be encouraged, for instance, even in public schools, let's say if you can deal with this early grade problem, that we really urge every country to look at that early grade traffic jam issue in terms of progression and learning. If the kids have things to read in the classroom, and if the school committees can be encouraged to ask the parents to give about half an hour to the kids to read at home, but you have to allow the kids then to take home the books, then that will help. You have to educate the parents along with the kids. That's the situation that we have because most of the parents don't have those basic literacy levels or basic education levels. So I think it would be unfair to say that all parents must do a lot. In fact, in sub-Saharan Africa, including in Tanzania, parents contribute a lot to schools, especially in terms of construction and in terms of, mobilizing money to buy resources and so on. And they would definitely support their kids to read, but it's the school which has to enable them to play that role, because many of them don't know how to do it. On the language of instruction, there were very pertinent questions. We cannot get into everything about that. In the main book, we do highlight examples from South Africa, from Ethiopia, about language of instruction, and the fact that if children are taught in the mother tongue or in a language at least with which they're familiar, like eventually here in the case of Tanzania, it's Kiswahili, then they do better, and that you need about 6 to 7 years of teaching in that language before they can move on to another language, because you need the academic literacy. We don't want to prescribe in a World Bank book what is the best policy for each country, because this doesn't depend only on technical matters. It depends on social and cultural factors. It depends on the composition within a country, and it depends on a political consensus and a social consensus. So whether Kiswahili should be used in lower secondary education or up to higher education, as you were suggesting, yes, it's something that the country should decide. The only thing I would say is that it's very highly unlikely that a country in this age can really move ahead without knowing one of the, let's call it, international languages. Just because a lot of scientific knowledge, a lot of mathematical knowledge, a lot of other kinds of literature and so on is available, say, in English, which has become so widespread, okay? I was just in Korea 2 days ago, and it's very surprising. There you don't see any signs in English. It's very hard to get around. The taxi drivers don't know English, etc. But their children are taught English because that's how they access all the language, all the knowledge that is there. Unless you have the resources like Japan, 150 years ago, they translated everything into Japanese. I don't think we can really afford to do that. So we would put Tanzanian students at a disadvantage if they didn't also learn another language. But what we need to ensure is that they learn that English very well in the first 7 years or first 9 years or whatever you decide, that they learn it well enough so that they can actually continue in the language of instruction. And finally, I think the minimum quality package for every school. We deliberately did not estimate, well, you said for every child, but I think what is more reasonably possible for a minister to do is probably at least to define it for every school, which would be based on the number of children. So eventually it comes down to every child. But we didn't define that exactly in the book. Why is that? Because you can put unrealistic numbers, which countries cannot afford. So this is something that you have to do depending on the resources that are available, and the main thing is you have to deliver that, okay? But so there's no point in creating a standard and then you don't actually adhere to it. And this is what, if you look at the example of Vietnam, they put very simple kind of indicators. And it's not even called minimum learning levels, minimum standards. They called it foundational standards or something like that, so that it doesn't look like you're giving poor schools a raw deal. So this is something that each country should really define for itself based on its economic resources, its budgetary resources, and its capacity to deliver. And that should be revised from time to time as the country grows. If Tanzania achieves middle income status by 2025, then it should have a different standard from what it would have now. So this is not something we can prescribe uniformly, but it is something we would like to help countries to develop and then to implement. Thank you.
Honorable Minister for Education, Science and Technology, Professor Joyce Ndalichako, Professor Nangise, Vice Chancellor of University of Salaam, dear friends from the World Bank, I see Sajita, our very good friend. One time I met you in Ethiopia, you told me that Tanzania is your home after India. So thank you very much for coming, but also for sharing your views about Tanzania. The World Bank team in Dar es Salaam is highly appreciated for the efforts. I'm surprised to see Bella Bed is not here, but I know she's busy. But please convey our greetings that she's doing a very good job. Cornelia, our own Kaboko. Kaboko is a Tanzanian, so we also appreciate for his really good contribution to the efforts to bring all these challenges together. The university for organizing this very important event, and I think the design of this event is also very important because it brought in a lot of stakeholders, and for me this is encouraging. We have seen a lot of analytics, we've also seen a lot of views from different people, and we are facing forward. And I think as we face forward, we need to have the right lenses to face forward. And one of the ingredients of this lens is to have the analytics. The analytics that brings us where we are, but also where we go. And I would like to congratulate the authors for really looking at Sub-Saharan Africa in its totality, but also looking at Tanzania when you presented and benchmarking Tanzania. Because as a country, we have our challenges, but we also need to see numbers and benchmark ourselves with the rest of the world. So this was very great, and I congratulate you very much for the same. Again, as you may see from panelists, but also from people who asked questions here, we need to create a movement. It's not about the minister. It's not about University of Islam. It's about everybody. In Tanzania, we at the ministry, we are confident of where we want to go. We have the leadership. The president himself, His Excellency Dr. John Pombe Magufuli, has a clear vision of education in Tanzania. And the lieutenant, Professor Joyce Ndalichako, she's really on top of the business. And I want to assure the World Bank and ourselves that we have the leadership, we have the confidence to deliver. We know the challenges. We are wearing the light lenses because we know that we have a lot of challenges, and I think the numbers tells it. And we have from pre-primary up to higher education. The minister was mentioning about a project by the name Higher Education for Economic Transformation. This morning I was meeting with the World Bank to try to design the project, to try to monetize higher education. But we are doing so in appreciation of the investment that we are doing at the basic level. Once everybody graduates from basic education, they will come to higher education. And if we are not ready, then it will be a disaster for this country. So we are trying to match up with whatever we are investing in lower level, but also we are trying to look at the analytics that we are presented today. In other words, I want to ask you guys to read the book. Let's create a movement. Let's create a movement together. Let's read this book. It is kind of trying to sketch our way forward. And let's take the journey with a clear vision of where we want to go. I thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mbwambo. Those words have been delivered on behalf of the Permanent Secretary, who for unforeseen events was not able to join us, but he sends his best regards. On behalf of the organizers, I would like now to welcome all of you